Now, if ever a tweet summarized our next discussion, it's this one. The former FNB chief executive, Michael Jordan, tweeted the following. You can see it in front of you. Bell Pottinger, McKinsey, KPMG and SAP are all foreign. So are the Guptas. This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight we're talking about private sector complicity when it comes to aiding and abetting the Gupta machinery. Joining me to talk about this is the increasingly outspoken chief executive of Sygnia, Magda Wierzycka. She joins us this evening on the Moneymakers. You're taking this Gupta issue almost personally, Magda. Perhaps we all should be.
I think we should be. I think, I'm taking this whole issue of corruption in South Africa very personally. I was a refugee once. I don't want to be a refugee from yet another country. So, I will fight for a free and fair South Africa. And I've got this growing perception that there is a handful of people who are holding 55 million South Africans hostage. If I can contribute by being outspoken and critical of what I'm seeing around me, then I will be, even if it's not the done thing in the corporate sector.
Now, what's interesting about the whole Gupta saga is up until now, it has been perceived to be an influential family that has corrupted possibly a handful, maybe slightly more, of politicians, and has got people in powerful positions with access to big state balance sheets to do their bidding, to do contracts, to do favors, to pass the money on. Perhaps what is more ominous is the assertion that there is some private sector complicity in this as well. And I think that is quite scary.
Well, it is indeed, but it shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, Guptas themselves don't do anything. They don't really have companies which provide valuable services to the state. So they have always positioned themselves as rent seekers, the middlemen in between government contracts and the private sector. And, for every rigged government tender, there is a private sector participant. And that is very disturbing, which is, one of the reasons I've chosen not to join any of the business associations, because I really don't want to sit in a room where potentially there are companies that are compromised by virtue of having paid bribes to the Guptas in order to secure government contracts. But I don't think it should come as a surprise. The Guptas have never truly provided a service in South Africa in any meaningful way.
I want to go through them sort of one by one, the private sector companies that have been linked through the emails, the famous Gupta emails that have been linked to the Guptas. Possibly the most famous is KPMG, whose prominence came to prominence in this Gupta saga when it was the first of the big financial services companies to say, we don't want to do business with these guys anymore. In the first week then, we saw the banks saying, we're not going to do business with these guys anymore. KPMG should be given credit for that, I suppose, but also has to be strongly criticized for its failure to report its concerns about transgressions to its own regulator, the independent regulating body for auditors, and also should be criticized for leaving it perhaps as long as it did.
Bruce, I think, KPMG has many issues, and they are auditors of Sygnia. So, I do have a meeting set up with them the moment I'm back in South Africa to listen to their explanation. But, the problem that I have with what happened with KPMG is that obviously they were the auditors who signed off on South African taxpayers' money being used to pay for Gupta's wedding. And yes, the money was laundered via Dubai through a wonderful washing machine. And there are wonderful graphs and charts circulating on Twitter if you're interested in seeing how that money laundering actually took place. But I need to ask the question of how one of the big four audit firms did not pick up on the money laundering exercise that was undertaken, and what sort of an audit do they perform if they cannot pick that up? And was it because of the fact that, their CEO at that time was a guest at the Gupta wedding? Was it because they were paid astronomical fees to potentially look the other way? I don't know. I'm going to look for all those answers when I get back.
Assuming you're not satisfied with the answers you get in that meeting, do you terminate their services immediately?
Absolutely, and immediately.
As long as you've got a backup
And,
auditor, because you don't want to get into trouble with your own listing on the JSE. You know what happened to Oak Bay when that happened. But Magda, when we look then and we go down the line of potential offenders, and again, one's got to be careful about this, because simply because somebody's been accused of doing something wrong doesn't automatically make them guilty. But one looks at a McKinsey, for example, and its relationship with Trillion. And again, the money trail tells an interesting tale there of complicit behavior.
Well, indeed, both with McKinsey and SAP, the issues become a lot more complicated, because there you see the Gupta-affiliated companies acting as middlemen and taking, cuts from tenders which are allocated to these consulting companies or to SAP for the provision of the actual services. So there the money trail is obvious. The explanations as to what role Gupta-related companies played is less obvious to anyone. And of course, the interesting thing would be is if there are investigations, the one side of the story that we will never hear is the story of the Gupta family, because I don't think that, they will make an appearance either in Parliament or in the court of law willingly. And we don't have a national prosecuting authority willing to prosecute them. So, that would be the interesting part of this equation.
As we're seeing with the world of Bell Pottinger falling apart, they're being investigated by their own informal regulatory authority. They've got a self-governing sort of process in the UK. There's a big association, 20,000 PR practitioners are part of it. Everybody wants to be part of the association. They've been referred to the committee of this association and could be kicked out of that association of public relations practitioners, which immediately threatens the viability of their business. And it's for global companies that operate in places like South Africa, where they think that they're above the law, they think they're going to get away with stuff, that the global consequences are what they should really be frightened of.
Indeed, and look, this isn't the first time we're seeing it. I think that, European companies, US companies, often when they operate in emerging markets, are very willing to pay bribes in order to secure contracts. I mean, we saw it in the armaments deal. So this isn't unique to South Africa. It's happening all over the place. In this instance, all of it has been exposed through the Gupta leaks, which, have kept all of us entertained for the last months or so. And it's very seldom that you actually see as explicit a proof of, that level of corruption as we see coming through in the Gupta emails, which no one is denying are fake any longer, which is a good thing. Bell Pottinger in the UK has a lot of clients, very prominent clients, and those clients should be asking Bell Pottinger some very, very serious questions, because, it's one thing to do PR. It's, even using social media, even using fake social media accounts. It's another to stir racial hatred in a country which has struggled for the last, 20 odd years to heal from exactly that racial division. So to step in and to stir up all of those emotions, all of that racial division, once again, is just unexcusable. But, on the issue of Bell Pottinger, and that's a very important point to remember, Bell Pottinger was a tool. The strategy was devised by Guptas and Duduzane Zuma. And those two players in this equation cannot be forgotten. There's way too much focus on what Bell Pottinger did, and too little focus on who gave them the brief to do it.
We're only seeing consequences playing out for corporate players in this because they're international companies that are regulated and managed elsewhere. In South Africa, we've got a failed national prosecuting authority as far as this is concerned. The regulatory system in South Africa is not coping, and one wonders, and it's only a matter of time before South African companies start emerging as being complicit in this entire saga, as to whether or not there are going to be any consequences for local companies for their complicity beyond public reaction, perhaps.
Bruce, I think given the political environment we're living through right now, up until December, I would be very surprised if anything happens. I think, the word captured can be applied to the Hawks, can be applied to NPA, and I don't say it lightly. They're doing nothing. And I don't expect them to do anything until such time as we can free South Africa of a government which, or at least players in the government, which are supporting this whole state capture project, at which stage prosecutions hopefully will follow. Prosecutions don't have to happen immediately. They can happen 5 years from now. But I have absolutely no doubt that what we are going through right now is a particular law for South Africa. It's a political law, it's an economic law, but we will emerge out of it. We are not Zimbabwe. We are a nation of 55 million people. And we will fight for our rights. We will fight for free and fair South Africa, even if it means, taking to the streets again. I saw an interview with Pravin Gordhan this morning, again, making rounds on Twitter, where he said, he would like to see people marching in the streets. And that's what we need to achieve. And we only need to look at the example of Brazil. It took a number of years, but, all those corrupt politicians are being brought to book. Jail sentences are being handed out. Prosecuting authorities are functioning again. And I'm an optimist. I believe that exactly the same thing will happen in South Africa.
South Africa will get its Lula moment finally. Santos wanted a Lula moment in South Africa. We hope that we do get our Lula moment, certainly of the example of the last 24 hours or so. Sygnia Chief Executive Magda Wierzycka taking time out of her holiday to talk to us this evening. I really appreciate it. More on the Gupta trials and tribulations, the emails and the filth that they spew about dodgy dealings behind the Saxonwald Empire. More on that next time here on The Moneymakers. Have yourselves a very good evening. Thank you, Magda Wierzycka.